Well, good morning. Well, actually, I guess not good morning. Probably good evening. Since this is supposed to be the Wednesday night thing, and I actually am doing it of an evening, and I'm not sure why I even said morning. I guess because of the Ecclesiastes things and all of that. But tonight for us at church is going to be mission service, so we'll be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be reading out of Psalm 63, verse 1, and Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 13. So that's going to be the areas that we'll be considering this evening. In the time that we've been living, they've different in these uncertain times, as a lot of the ads go, and all the circumstances, back when the quarantine was going pretty strong, and who knows, it may end up going again here for a whole long time, but we were having to, buy our groceries like at Walmart. You'd order them online and go pick them up. And a lot of times they would say, now, did you know what the substitutions are? And they'd read off the list and, you could accept it or not, but there really wasn't much you could do about it. And so that was just the way that it was. And substitutions are something that we deal with in a lot of our life. I mean, it's just one of the things that we have to deal with. Now, sometimes we make the choices to do that. I mean, we like to shop at Aldi's because, even though it's all store brand stuff, a lot of it's pretty good. And in fact, some of it is just downright decent and better maybe even than some other places, like their spiral sliced ham. You can't touch it with anything else that's out there. Now, their raspberry covered cheesecake is horrible, but on the whole, most things are pretty good, and you can deal with them. But there are some times when it's important that we accept no substitutions. I mean, sometimes in dealing with certain electronic parts, or if you're building computers, you're not going to look for a substitute Intel. I mean, AMD's good, and I've built a lot of computers using that. But then there's, you can go to Wish and buy things, but you have no idea what you're getting, and that's not a time to do substitutions. And there's other areas where that it can be that way too. It used to be more that way in the past, even than today. Years ago, food production kind of moved out of the homes into factories. As the whole industrial revolution took hold, they decided that everything had to be done in factories, and bread and pies, and all kinds of foods and stuff. And it was kind of interesting because when they did that, one of the things that happened was that the manufacturers started looking for ways to cut corners to make a product that people would still eat and I guess would still nourish, but would be cheaper than what it was to make at home. And there's a whole documentary out there on YouTube. I think it's still probably available, about Victorian bakers, and it kind of went down through the whole thing of how the bakery started and all of that. And it talked about all the stuff that they started adding to their doughs, like alum and sulfate of copper and those kind of things to expand it, anyway, to make the dough go further. But that wasn't the only ones that were doing things. The dairymen, they would sell cream that they had thickened with flour, and they would water down the milk, and sometimes they would add chalk or plaster of Paris to milk that was off color because of sick cows or something like that. Some grocers would add sand to their sugar to make it go further. I'm sure that really worked on your teeth. And butter. Grandma used to talk about, there was a lady in her town that would sell butter sometimes, and she had churned up a bunch of butter, and when she got done, she looked in there and there were flies, so she decided she didn't want to keep it for her house, so she sent her girl to the grocer's with it and told her, said, now sell it to him, and then buy a pound of butter to bring it back home for us. And so, she did it. But the grocer asked her, said, why are you buying butter if you're selling butter? And being a little girl, she just answered truthfully. And she told him all about the flies and all that, and said, Mom said that what people don't know won't hurt them. And he said, oh, okay. So he went in the back room and he took the wrapper off that was on the butter and put his own wrapper on it and brought it back out and gave it back to her and sent her home with it, with the idea that, what they don't know won't hurt them. But that wasn't the only ones that, some merchants would put it together like a collection of calcium, gypsum, gelatin, fat, and mashed potatoes. Stir all that up and sell that as butter. They probably put some kind of food coloring in it as well. And then even as late as the 60s, over in England, the guy got nailed for selling Parmesan cheese. And it turned out it was ground up umbrella handles. And I mean, the ground Parmesan cheese isn't really that wonderful anyway. I mean, we use it on spaghetti and stuff just because it adds something. I'm not sure what. But I don't know what ground up umbrella handles would do for you. Probably make you maybe sick. I don't know. But anyway, substitutions. Now, someone has said that God's most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him. And I mean, this is true. I mean, if we're fully satisfied in Him, we're not looking around for some kind of substitution, some kind of something to take the place. If we really love Him, we're telling everybody about Him and all that. It's kind of like, like Amway salesmen do. Every conversation, well, have you tried my Lord? Rather than some Amway product. But in the two passages of Scripture that we have here, we have a contrast, because David is talking, over in Psalm 63 and verse 1, a psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. And then, of course, you have Jeremiah, which is God complaining about the Israelites. And it says, for my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. So probably even if there was any water at all, it would be just in the bottom, which it would be kind of more of a sludge than anything else. But what it boiled down to was that the Israelites had gotten into a kind of a habit of accepting substitutes for God. If they got in trouble, they ran to the Egyptians. If they needed to win wars, they turned to horses and chariots, and all the things, rather than going to God like they were supposed to. But here in this psalm where David's talking, I mean, I love that picture there. My soul thirsts for you and my flesh faints for you. That there's the Hebrew poetry going on, but it kind of reminds me of like when we were in Mississippi, and after church services, we'd stand around and talk, and the guys were talking about Vienna sausages, moon pies, and RC colas. And they would, to them, they were, man, that would be a meal. I had never really grown up on Vienna sausages, and I'd tried them a time or two, but I just didn't really see the appeal. But as they would be talking, one of the guys, Brother Hatcher, he'd say, you've flung a craving on me, and I'm going to have to go tomorrow and buy some Vienna sausages and have a meal with those. Well, the worst thing was they'd fling a craving on me, too. I didn't like them. But, they'd be talking about them and how wonderful they were and how they'd gotten so practiced they could take a fork and get all of them out at once and all those kind of things. So I'd go buy some. And they weren't any better that time than they had been the time before. But it didn't matter. There was just something that they created this hankering in me for them. And David's talking about the fact that all the time he has this desire, this hankering. Jesus says, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. That'd be the same kind of idea. And thirst is a good analogy. I mean, our bodies are so reliant upon water. Major part of the body is water. The brain is 70%, as is muscles and fat, believe it or not. The blood is 82%, and our lungs are 90% water. So water is vital. And foods, you can go over 40 days on a fast without it taking you out, but about a week. And if you don't have liquid, it's going to do you in. It's vital. It's so important to us. Now, in Jeremiah, in this passage that we have here, the Lord talks about two different sources of water. He has the fountain of living water, which would be an artesian well, and then he also has the cisterns. And man, there'd be so much difference between the two of them. I love good old spring water, and that would be the artesian well, but the cistern water just isn't that wonderful. And quite honestly, the way he's talking about it being, cracked and all of that, it would be kind of brackish and stuff. And in fact, it would kind of remind me a little bit about the water out of a fish pond. And you've seen those little decorative fish ponds, and they'll have the little fountain there, and it'll be spraying the water out, and it kind of oxygenates the water a little bit, but not nearly enough. So what would it be like if you were standing with someone talking, you visited them, and in their backyard they have one of these goldfish ponds and everything, and the sun's out and everything, and they're just like, man, I'm getting kind of thirsty. So I think I'm going to get a drink. And instead of heading to the house is where you'd expect them to go, they run over to the fish pond and they kneel down and lean over and sip out of that little fountain that's kicking the water out. You'd kind of like, ugh, wouldn't you? Who knows? All kinds of creepy crawlies are in that water and stuff. They talked about the cisterns over there in Israel, and the water would be coming off the clay roofs and out of the other places, and they said it would be about the color of soapy water, and it would taste like a stable, and it sometimes even had worms in it. So, not real wonderful. Be better probably than fish pond water, but not a whole lot. And so God is saying that, the people that were leaving him and looking for satisfaction elsewhere just as well be drinking out of a fish pond. And so using that analogy, Psalm 63 and verses 1 and 2, we've read verse 1, but it says, let me see you in the sanctuary. Verse 2, let me see how mighty and glorious you are. And so the picture we have here is if we're not pursuing God with all of our hearts, then we're drinking from the fish pond. That's just the way that it is. Now, if you notice that first part, and I long for you, my whole being desires you, kind of like a dry, worn out, waterless land. My soul is thirsty for you. And it's talking about the earnestness that he has. It's a driving force in his life. It's amazing how in our life, when we're dealing with different things, have you ever noticed how the pleasant tasks are easier to get to than the unpleasant ones? You may have a hobby that you love to do, and it's so easy to do that where if maybe you need to clean the garage and you keep, Mark Twain says, never to do today what you can put off until tomorrow. And that's kind of what happens there. a lot of times. But as far as David is concerned, the most important thing in existence is his relationship with God. It's vital to him, and it draws him to God. It's like a thirst that just won't let him be and won't let him go off on a tangent away from him. But a lot of people get sidetracked by things that just won't satisfy. They can't satisfy. They don't even come close. When I was a kid, we did landscape gardening, and Grandpa owned the business, and he didn't really like to take lunches. So a lot of times we'd stop at this neighborhood grocer, and it wasn't a supermarket by any means. I mean, it was a small building, and the only thing I really remember about it is the old metal ceiling fans, because of course this is back in the 60s, but they're green. They had a weird noise to them and all that stuff. But we'd go in there, and Grandpa would buy like the Bama pecan pies, but I would usually get like a chocolate Hostess pie and maybe a carton of milk or something like that. Usually Dutch chocolate milk. And that was our meal, and then we'd go back and hit it again. Well, later, Circle K opened up. They're pretty close. We started going there. It was more convenient. And about that time was when they come out with the 32-ounce bottle of soda pop. Now, I didn't usually buy Coca-Cola. I usually got Mr. Pibb. But we'd buy the pie, or I'd buy the pie and a bottle of that, and that was, I'd drink that down. But you know what? That didn't make me any less thirsty. I was still just as thirsty afterwards, and maybe even more so with all that sugar and stuff. It just didn't satisfy. It really didn't. And later we ended up getting an igloo and keeping water in that. We'd fill it up from house to house with our hose, or their hoses, Good old hose water. Can't beat it. But, it's better than a fish pond. Oh, by the way, that bottle, I looked it up, trying to find a picture of it, and I found one on eBay. They're selling that thing for $25. We used to buy them for less than $1. But anyway, now, verse 2 here could also be translated, I have seen you in your sanctuary. And it's talking about the fact that, when you've been in a service and God's presence is there and it just he settles in on you and everything, it spoils you for anything else. And if it's just an old, dry service, if you don't feel God's presence in some way, you don't really feel like you've worshiped. You got to have that. And when you have had that, then everything else gets compared to that. It kind of reminds me of my grandpa's place. Now, when he retired, Grandpa Myers, not the landscape gardener, but the other one, when he retired from farming and different things, one of his daughters and her husband supplied them with some land there by their house, and they moved a trailer there and all of that. But they had a well that they had drilled, and it had come through the cave and into a spring that was there. And man, that water, it was cold and clear and sweet and delicious, and it makes me thirsty to just think about it. And I should have brought another bottle of water with me, because I'm going to be spitting cotton balls before I get done here. But man, that water was so good. I mean, I love the bottled water, the spring water that you can get, but it's still nothing like the water that was there at Blacksmith Cave. I mean, that water was fantastic. I loved it. And I compare anything that I drink, any water that I drink, to that, because it was just the best water in the world. Now, the second thing that we find here is that if we're not giving praise to God for all the good in our life, we're drinking from a fish pond. And this is verses 6 and 7 and also verse 4. He says, as I lie in bed, I remember you. All night long I think of you. And because you've always been my help, in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. And in verse 4 he says, I'll give you thanks as long as I live. I'll raise my hands to you in prayer. And it's kind of interesting. You know, someone has said that gratitude's an attitude, and I believe that. It's a cultured attitude. It's something that we can work on and develop in our life. And it's something that we should work on and develop in our life as we thank God for all the good things. But a lot of people don't, because they feel like that they are actually the ones that are responsible. So, you know, it's my job that's provided me with this. It's my money that's done this. It's my, you know, well, they're not thinking about the fact that it's the health that God gives them that allows them to do the job that they're doing, that you know, that all the circumstances that he allows their way so that everything works the way that it should. And one of the things about this is that if we're going to take credit for all the good, then we also have to take responsibility for all the bad, because we can't divide it up and say, okay, I'll take the good and God will be responsible for the bad. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it's, you know, it's all us or not. You know, sure, we're responsible for some things, but it's within the perimeters that God has given us and the blessings that God's given us. And if we don't look at it from that standpoint, well, life's just not going to make sense sometimes. It's kind of like the businessman, you know, that he was having a rough day. I mean, some of the accounts were giving him all kinds of problems and everything. And so he realized that if he was going to get anywhere, he was going to have to work right through lunch. So he told his secretary, he says, run down to the hot dog vendor down there on the street and get me a couple of hot dogs with some mustard and onions, maybe a little ketchup, and I'll just eat those with some coffee and keep working. So she did, and he did. And it didn't work because all the stress of the accounts that he was working, you know, that was bad enough. But then you throw in a hot dog with onions and then a coffee on top of it. By 2:00, man, his stomach was just roiling and he was in a mess. And he told his secretary, I'm going to have to go home. I'll just pick up tomorrow. So he did. He headed out. Well, on the other side of town, there was another guy, and he was having trouble with his accounts too. He actually had lost one of his accounts, and his boss had just chewed him out. He was having trouble elsewhere and everything. And he finally told his secretary, man, I can't even think. He said, this day has just been horrible. I'm going to go home. I'll just start again in the morning. Maybe it'll be a fresh day. Everything will be good. So he left too. Well, the first guy, when he gets down to the subway, the place is packed. I guess everybody decided to go home early. So to get on there, he had to actually turn around and back his way on. And once he got himself backed in, the doors closed and the crowd just pushed him right up against the glass. The subway train took off, man, and everything's going across, in front of his face. And that wasn't doing his stomach any good. I mean, it was just getting worse and worse and worse. Well, the other guy, he comes and gets to his subway stop, and he's waiting, and just thinking about all the bad, everything that's gone bad today and everything. Well, the subway train pulls up, the doors open up, the guy that's there, that's been riding there with his face against the glass, up chucks, the doors close, and the subway leaves. And the guy is so shocked because he's gotten covered with hot dog sauce. He didn't even get on. And he's standing there. He looks around. Finally looks at one guy and says, why me? Why me? And we're all going to have bad situations in our life. But if we're trying to take credit for everything, we're not going to have anyone to turn to in those circumstances. Where you and I, if we're trusting in God and allowing Him to be the one that's in control, in Romans 8:28, we know that in all things God works for good for those who love Him, those whom He's called according to His purpose. I like this translation because it says we know that in all things. It's not saying that everything is good. It's just saying that in all the circumstances that we deal with, that God is able to help us in every circumstance and turn those things to our good as He sees fit. But we're allowing Him to work in our lives as He wants to work. Now, in this passage of Scripture, in Psalm 63, if you go down through it, and I'm not going to put it up right now, but you'll find that in the first 7 verses, he talks about praise. And he uses different words there. One of them is to address in a loud tone. Another one's to bow the knee and lift up an offering, make a show or boast, to shout. And one of them is even to creak. And I was trying to figure that one out. And I figure, the background of the psalm is this. I mean, David's on the run from Absalom, and he's running for his life. He's not at home. He's not in familiar surroundings. He's not able to go to the tabernacle. But as he's laying there in the night watches and he knows his guard's out there, rather than thinking, poor, pitiful me, he's thinking about all the blessings that God has given to him. And as he's doing this, he begins to maybe cry and shake as he's crying or whatever, as he's thinking about the wonderful blessings, not crying from pity, but crying from blessings, and it's making the bed creak. I don't know. I think it's as good an idea or illustration or as anyone would have, or an explanation, I guess I should say. Now, third, if we're not basing life satisfaction on God's mercy, then we're drinking from the fish pond. I mean, there's no other way around it. In verses 3 and verse 5, he says, your constant love is better than life itself. And so I praise you. My soul will feast and be satisfied, and I will sing glad songs of praise to you. And so the picture here, I mean, we're all looking for something that gives life meaning. In our studies on Sunday, as we're looking at the pursuit of happiness found in Ecclesiastes, we see this. I mean, if life doesn't have meaning, then there's no happiness. If life doesn't have meaning, there's no joy. There's nothing to make it worthwhile. And we know that meaning isn't found just in our careers. It's not in just our possessions. We've already seen all of that. And it's not in just our family. As important as family is, there's got to be something more. There's got to be a little bit more, at least, if things are going to be worthwhile. Now, the phrase better than life actually holds the key to real satisfaction. And it's because in the Hebrew, the word that's translated life literally means life comes from your good mercy. And the word life there is not talking about just the biological process. I mean, the closest thing in the New Testament would be John 10:10, where, we've used this over and over. Like I said, it's the key verse to Ecclesiastes. I have come that they might have life and they might have it abundantly. And this is really the key verse to life, is that if we want something that's overflowing, it's only found in Christ. That's where the gusto is. That's what makes life worth living. It's more than just the biological process, and it's better than existing. The story's told about a little kid that went to his aunt's house, and she asked him what he would like to do while he was there. He said, well, one thing, he says, at home, so we have pancakes, and I'm only allowed to have 2, but I want to have all the pancakes I want. And so she said, okay, and kind of laughed about it. But the next morning, she did. She started making him pancakes, and boy, she was a pancake making machine. And he was plowing through them, and he ate, But when he got to about his 8th pancake, then he started slowing down. And when he got to his 10th pancake, he was having trouble getting through it. And she was over at the stove, and she said, are you ready for more pancakes? And he said, no. He said, I'm not ready for pancakes. I don't want any more. In fact, I don't want the ones I ate. And a lot of things in life that we think are going to satisfy, they don't bring satisfaction. They end up just being nothing, But David says that he was finding satisfaction in God. And in fact, in verse 5, I love this picture. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food. Isn't that a cool picture? Fat and rich food. And it's talking about the word that's used, fat, actually means an abundant amount of it, where the rich is talking about, the choicest food. So together we get a picture of good eats and lots of it. And I ascribe to that form. Back when I was doing insurance, the one company I worked for, they had a black tie affair every year that you had to go to, and it was kind of a rah-rah meeting and all of that, but they did it a little bit different form. And you had to wear tuxedos and all of that, and they had live cast from the headquarters and all those kind of things. But they gave you a menu and you had to pick the things that you wanted. And so I picked steak, and it all sounded wonderful. But then when they served it to you, this is what you got. And it was kind of like you got another little plate that had a pile of weeds on it that they called salad. That was, the spring mix, but a lot of them were weeds. And then you got, this here's your steak and potatoes, and I don't remember what the green stuff was, but it almost looks like a dirty plate, but it's supposed to be fancy. But the thing about it is, that's 2 bites. 2 bites. Now, like I said before, I'm from the city, but I'm a country boy at heart, and I know how to eat well. This is a plate from Lambert's. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Lambert's, they bring you out a pile of food, and then they have extras all the time. But what a lot of people don't know is, if by chance, and I don't know how in the world it could be, but if by chance you were still hungry when you got done, they would bring you seconds. I've never asked for seconds. I've barely gotten through firsts. And the picture here is, as far as God is concerned, and as far as David is concerned, anything outside of God is going to be of lesser quality. It's going to be meager portions. It may be gourmet, but it's not worth it. It's kind of like the difference here. And the only way we're truly, truly satisfied is in being in God and allowing Him to be the center point of our life. It's having this point of being where my soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. But it's because of the fact that I long for you and my whole being desires you like a dry, worn out, waterless land. We won't be drinking from the fish pond in that situation. So there you have it. I trust that this has been beneficial to you, and we will look forward to seeing you Sunday as we pick up in Ecclesiastes. It'll be Ecclesiastes chapter 4, I believe. And Lord bless you, and I hope you have a good week in the remainder of it. So take care.